Well, obviously my acknowledgements. Francesca is brilliant. If ever Francesca calls any one of our students here to work with them or to embark on a project, you've got to say yes, leave whatever you're doing, and with panache and excitement, just fly to Mdina. Well, obviously there's Michael and the entire board of Fondazione Patrimonio Malti. There's my department of art history, Nadet, and my art and art history, Sasirna. There are the lenders, private collectors and institutions, colleagues, especially Dr. Tiffany Racco, who produced an essay for the catalog on more or less the same thing, on panache and artistic invention. Well, obviously I want to thank, rather than wish to thank, Lady Marina Marks and Martin Royalton Kisch for generously sponsoring the event. Well, I hope that my lecture will not be assessed on its speed and of delivery and on performance, but on its quality. Usually my lectures are 50 to 55 minutes long. طيب. طلعنا. In a mix of admiration and frustration at the speed with which the Maltese artist Giuseppe Calì worked on his monumental and large-scale religious projects, his elder contemporary and artistic rival and notably slow painter Carlo Ignazio Cortese nicknamed him the Devil of the Brush. This is one of a long list of nicknames given to artists who were especially fast and at the same time extraordinarily talented. Well, the list is long, but the most celebrated nicknames of them all were those of the Venetian artist Tintoretto, who was nicknamed Il Furioso, and of the Neapolitan Baroque artist Luca Giordano, who was famously called Luca fa presto. Well, stories abound on how art lovers, patrons, and connoisseurs marveled at their dexterity, at their panache, at their invention, but especially at their virtuosity. Well, the famous playwright Andrea Calmo, praised Tintoretto for being the enemy of idleness, whilst the biographer Filippo Baldinucci proclaimed that il suo pennello era un fulmine che abbagliava ed attirava ognuno. If not the work of an angel, it is the work of the devil. Giordano's patron, the Marchese del Carpio, Viceroy of Naples, would once exclaim when shown his work. Well, Calì shared with Luca Giordano a Neapolitan extraction and a sheer admiration for what we call the devils of the brush. Well, in Maltese, we also use the word indemoniat, dak indemoniat, because he really goes fast. He really works fast. Well, it's not only about painters and sculptors, but in music, for example, Niccolò Paganini's nickname, namely the Devil's Violinist, was brought about by his virtuoso talent, his unparalleled dexterity, and the extraordinary ferocity by which his bow hit the violin, just like a violent brush hits the canvas. Stories about artistic panache and rapidity of execution, or prestezza, as the Italians call it, abound in biographies. And speed, when combined with virtuosity, was a virtue which was admired and championed by a very long list of authors, theorists, biographers, and artists. Pliny the Elder, Alberti, Vasari, Baldinucci, and Bellori, amongst others, many others, marveled at artistic speed and considered it as a sign of genius, as well-cultivated talent, and as a decisive victory over long hours of training and of painstaking practice. Alberti, for Alberti, the speed of the hand was a reflection of the power of the mind. In the Baroque period, writers praised artistic speed far more than slow work. There was a kind of performance, a display in how fast artists worked. Their action was a show, a kind of show, and art lovers and patrons would line up to see them in action, whilst biographers would write about it, would describe it. In 1693, for example, Charles II, the Habsburg king of Spain, invited Luca Giordano to paint at the Escorial, where he painted extensively in fresco. His biographer Palopino tells us that he invited him so that he could personally see him in action. This is the kind of performance that these artists played with. Time, tempo. Time, therefore, held a pivotal role in the assessment of artistic reputation, and there exists a fascinating art theoretical debate surrounding the worthiness and the risks, capital R, capital I, capital S, capital K and S, the risks that fast or slow artists faced. There were instances, however, when theorists and famous artists reprimanded speed, especially if these artists compromised on quality and used their talent to economize on invention. There's a wonderful list of warnings, reprimandations, and artists like the most celebrated of the ancient Greek painters, Apelles of Kos, here painted by Tiepolo, Michelangelo, the Renaissance giant, and Titian, they are all held to have rebuked and warned artists who economized whilst working fast. Renaissance theory was marked by a certain mistrust of fast and rapid work, particularly because slow and cautioned work betrayed what? It betrayed a long-established artisanship, a value by which artists labored, especially in tempera, to bring their work to appropriate degrees of finish. Slow execution, it was held, made the work last longer. So if you want your work to last longer for centuries, you have to work slowly and meticulously. Apelles, whose skills were described by Pliny in his natural history, had very famously mocked the work of a painter who bragged with him, who boasted while showing him a work, that he had executed his work very fast. You need not tell me, the work itself shows it. Apelles rebuked. Well, Apelles was seen in the Renaissance as the archetype of the ideal painter, and stories such as this struck hard in artists' minds. Indeed, Apelles, almost ironically, Pliny tells us, then scolded himself for being too diligent and for continuously searching to perfect his own work. This quote struck hard, and in a romantic repeat, legend narrates how the great Michelangelo, who was famed for his meticulous method, rebuked Giorgio Vasari when the latter showed him the frescoes that he executed in 1547 for the Sala dei Cento Giorni, this famous Sala in the Cancelleria in Rome. While showing him around and showing him the frescoes in the Sala dei 100 Giorni, because it was executed in 100 days, Vasari bragged with Michelangelo about the rapidity of his execution and that he had executed the work not only with the greatest possible rapidity, but also with incredible facility and without effort. Well, Michelangelo was not impressed and shot him down with a snide comment. It shows. Si vede. Well, what was Vasari's fault? Well, Vasari's fault was that at the Cancelleria, his speed had clearly compromised quality. And this was the great, there's a mobile sound. This was the great danger, indeed, the pitfall of speed. Theorists and biographies used such stories to continuously mark on this danger. The debate which we are discussing therefore centered on whether speed was used by artists as a time-saving device, or whether, as we see in the show, in our show at Palazzo Falson, the lightness of touch, the rapidity of execution, the quick-moving hand was what? The ultimate victory over invention. The racing hand meant to keep up or work faster than the striking brilliance of invention. Tintoretto, the great Venetian painter, despite criticism leveled that he used his fast pace to save on time, had in reality championed the oil technique, something which clearly could not have been established in the previous centuries through the painstaking layering of work executed in tempera. Despite his own facility, Vasari himself criticized Tintoretto for, he writes, leaving as finished works sketches still so rough that the brushstrokes may be seen, done more by chance and fury than with judgment and design. Well, this now sounds to be most unfair, because Vasari had not yet opened to the exciting exploitation of the oil technique that hallmarked Tintoretto's work. Moreover, this criticism seems to have stemmed from the notable rivalry between Titian's, and that's a detail from a portrait of Titian, a self-portrait in profile of Titian, from Titian's slowness and the young Tintoretto's speed. Titian, famed for the liberty of his brush, but also for the layering of his works, was notable also for his tardiness in completing work. And, just like Apelles, his almost exaggerated methods of layering, working, reworking, and retouching his own work. Biographers described him as notably critical of the loose and rapid manner adopted by his famous pupil, namely Tintoretto. It seems that for Titian, making his Renaissance clients repeatedly wait for his delayed work championed his own status as the leading artist in the city. Well, the reception towards speed opened up most effectively in the Baroque. Gian Lorenzo Bernini worked fast, furiously, effectively, and without pause. Filippo Baldinucci noted how Bernini divorava I marmi. He devoured marble and never struck a false blow, an accomplishment of those who made themselves superior to art rather than those who are experts in art. In many ways, it is here clearly remarked that virtuosity combined with dexterity made artists superior to art itself. There are many beautiful stories of Bernini at work. One of the most famous is that of the two busts of Cardinal representing Cardinal Scipione Borghese, which are still at the Villa Borghese in Rome, and of the reception, and of how Cardinal Borghese himself had marveled at them. Why? Because the two had been executed in the time allotted to one. Well, we have earlier mentioned how there was some kind of performance and how fast artists worked. We've mentioned how the King of Spain had called Giordano to see him perform, and how direction was a kind of mesmerizing show, which art lovers would line up to see. In 1633, for example, the Tuscan letterato Lelio Giudiccioni wrote to Bernini and described the artist's work and his method of execution, whilst comparing the movement of his fingers to a musician playing the harp. He wrote, "I shall never forget the delight I took in seeing every morning how your lordship does 1,000 different things with a singular grace, conversing, always keeping abreast of contemporary events, while your hands are engaged, far from discussion, crouching, stretching, wielding your fingers on the model, with the speed and variety of someone playing a harp." Well, such performance was obviously also captured in the workshop of Peter Paul Rubens. The famous Flemish artist was famed for the fury and the speed of his brush, which Bellori, a classicist, described as la gran prontezza e la furia del pennello. In his discussion of the 26 impressive pictures composing the Medici cycle, now at the Louvre, one of the most impressive halls at the Louvre, executed in the 1620s, the awestruck Bellori wrote, "His figures seem to be executed with one stroke of the brush, and are as inspired as a breath of fresh air." Fresh Zayda, so must it then. So, when the Danish doctor Otto Sperling visited the studio of Rubens in 1621, he described his performance. He found the great artist busy executing a painting, but at the same time supervising the work of his many assistants. He was dictating a letter and having it read aloud to him whilst conversing with them. Sperling was stunned by what he saw, but, he writes, "We kept silent so as not to disturb him with our talk. Rubens himself began to talk to us, while still continuing to work, to listen to the reading, to dictate his letter, answering our questions, and displaying astonishing powers." Speed, therefore, became almost the subject of myth, a mesmerizing attraction to princes and laymen. The stories are so many. De Dominicis narrates that when in 1685 Luca Giordano executed the large painting, this is a great picture, of Saint Francis Xavier baptizing the Indians, now at the Museo di Capodimonte in Naples, executed for the Chiesa, originally executed for the Chiesa di San Francesco Saverio in Naples. He completed it, he says, in 1 day and 1 night, without stopping to rest. It seems, the story holds, that on the onset of this commission, the Viceroy of Naples, the Marchese del Carpio, wanted the painting to be completed quickly in time for the upcoming feast day of St. Francis Xavier. And he had specifically ordered Luca Giordano to give the commission priority. Giordano, however, failed to work on the picture. And close to the feast day, the viceroy was reportedly enraged to learn that the painting had not yet been commenced. The Dominicis tells us that when Giordano got to know of the viceroy's fury, he left everything and raced to his workshop and executed the impressive piece, consisting of more than 20 full-size figures in one day and one night without a break. When the news of Giordano's feat spread throughout the city of Naples, the church attracted crowds who admired the work, not only because it was made quickly, but because it was excellent. Non già trapazzata della fretta, ma perché eccellente. Well, 2 days later, news of its completion arrived to the viceroy, and that the painting was already installed on its altar. This was 2 days later. In disbelief, the viceroy went to the church himself in order to see how this could be true. We can imagine him with his retinue marching down the nave. Mesmerized, in front of the picture, he uttered the now very famous line: "Whoever made this picture is an angel or a demon." Hence, the title of our show. Well, these stories are beautiful. And similar stories are told about other 17th century artists who executed their work with great rapidity. We can mention Lanfranco, Odazzi, and Guercino, amongst many others. Baldinucci wrote about Guercino's fast method of execution and narrated with awe how Guercino could lay down a composition and complete almost the entire picture in one single sitting. This is one which I threw in Italian. That's our Guercino friend, and that's the quote. Il Guercino la dipinse in una notte e dal lume di torcia, tanto che, alludendo a questa sua velocità nell'operare, il Tiarino, was a painter, gli ebbe a dire queste parole: Signor Gio Francesco, gli altri pittori fanno quanto possono, ma voi fate quanto volete. Fu solito operare poco più alla prima, cioè abbozzando e immediatamente terminando. This was fast work. Well, let's consider very briefly slow work. Bellori and Malvasia speak, for example, about the great Bolognese artist, Domenico Zampieri, whose own nickname was Il Bue, the ox, because this reflected his method. His biographers tell us that at a young age he was jeered about this. But his tutor, Annibale Carracci, was his great admirer and repeatedly defended him from the jeers of his detractors, noting that the ox is strong and performs solidly, and that the work of the ox is durable. So this is a Renaissance thing, that you work slowly and meticulously so that your work will last fast. However, biographers also reminded their readers that Domenichino did not have the flair and the panache of the fast and of the agile. Well, the Dominici tells us of how another notably slow artist, the incredibly famous Florentine painter Carlo Dolci, was proudly showing a small painting that he spent 6 months finishing, showing it to, out of all people, Luca Giordano. The story tells us of how Carlo Dolci fell into a lethal depression after Giordano told him, there should be a quote there. It's gone. Carlino mio, ti morrai dalla fame per la lunga fatica. In a dramatic twist to the story, this conversation seems, the biographers tell us, to have been a motivating factor that saw Carlo Dolci fall into a depression that eventually led to his very sad death. His own slowness had killed him. Well, at least that is the picture that biographers narrate, almost admonishing other slow artists not to follow his example. And what about patron's reception of speed? How does the patron fit in this? Well, biographers and theorists would belittle and shame those patrons who prize their works not on quality and invention, but on how long their execution took. Bellori himself firmly noted that such patrons would have failed to understand what art was, would have failed to understand the inventive and technical virtuosity required and the amount of study and painstaking practice that it took in order to execute work with great facility. I'm grateful to Tiffany Rocco for showing me this. Oops. Because the next slide is one of the most curious archival records for payments to artists. I'm not too sure if it was written in desperation or in admiration. In 1682, Luca fa Presto, whom we have mentioned over and over again, painted this large ceiling canvas of the apparition of the Virgin to Saint Bernard for the Chiesa della Santissima Annunziata in Florence in less than 2 days. Now, this time, this is not hearsay, this is not what the biographers tell us, but what the document tells us. On completion of his work, Luca Giordano went to pick up his payment. The awestruck friar and financial controller of the Santissima Annunziata disbursed the payment, and at the same time noted in the church's own financial records that he had disbursed 100 doppie per il quadro fatto in 44 ore, for a painting executed in 44 hours. Well, indeed, this sort of document is the kind of thing that ties everything up. Mesmerized by talent, the friar recorded Giordano's extraordinary feat. In many ways, we can try to imagine Caravaggio at work on the monumental beheading of St. John the Baptist within the oratory of the Decollato in Valletta. Bellori, through a second-hand account of the artist's work in Malta, gave a vivid description of Caravaggio at work and recorded how the artist usò ogni potere del suo pennello, avendo lavorato con tanta fierezza, working rapidly and combining pride with force, so much so that he left the ground visible to act as a Middleton. And there's more. The young Melchiorre Gaffà, according to his biographer Leone Pascoli, was unparalleled in terms of invention and in terms of disegno. But he needed tutorship in carving marble because, portato dal vivo fuoco che aveva, vorrebbe tutto finir in pochi colpi. Marble was not as soft as the limestone that the artist was used to and could not be chipped away at the same speed or with the same speed of execution. Well, one of the star exhibits in our show is this bust. Winston Churchill famously gave the sculptor Vincent Apap 15 minutes of his time at Downing Street for the artist to draft and model the basic shape of his head from a larger than life-size lump of clay. It's a large portrait. And we can imagine Vincent Apap going up to Downing Street for an official portrait, miskin, min għalih that he's going to have a room for his own and all the time of his life. Apap, celebrated for the speed with which he modeled portraits in wet clay during live sittings, took up the challenge and produced a work which left all in awe. Apap's head of Churchill captures the artist's hand at work, applying wet clay, exerting pressure, moving quickly and palpably capturing the dynamics of the brain, intent and racing. Against what? Against time ticking away. Before his sitter abruptly stood up to leave the room, and he captures the story brilliantly. I took a lump of clay and my tools to number 10 Downing Street, and I waited for him in a drawing room. Soon Sir Winston came in to give me 15 minutes of his break during a cabinet meeting. He sat there lost in thought, head perfectly still, occasionally puffing on his cigar or sipping a glass of whiskey. Immediately the 15 minutes were over, Sir Winston rose from his seat and came to inspect my work. He was so visibly pleased that he exclaimed, "Remarkable," and called in the cabinet ministers to view the bust. Well, what have we got here? We have the same ingredients that we have been reading over and over again in the stories of the other biographies. We've got awe, the mesmerized sitter. We've got performance, the artist fast at work. And we've got quality. Well, the exhibition, The Devil of the Brush, celebrates precisely this, speed and virtuosity, and explores the exciting dynamics between artistic invention and technical brilliance. In the works produced, small works, by the major protagonists of Maltese art between 1650 and the year 2000, throughout the centuries, these Maltese and Italian artists working in Malta were clearly admired for fast work, for the speed by which they handled their tools and executed their work. This is so palpably manifest in the work that we show, in work in which artists let loose their creative energy to jot down and capture their thoughts. Well, obviously the exhibition is not a large one because it's conditioned by the room itself. Therefore, it's an exhibition of small-scale work, but the spread of techniques that we chose is wide-ranging. Why? Because rapidity translates in all techniques. Well, the star is Melchiorre Gaffar's Charity of St. Thomas of Villanova, one of the finest terracotta models of the Roman Baroque. Executed in 1663, it was meant to be installed in a niched structure, now lost, that replicated in small scale the transeptal end of the Church of Sant'Agostino in Rome, and was to serve as a model for its patron, Prince Camillo Pamphili, to see and judge. In this work, Gaffar pushed his inventive genius to its limits and produced a work of outstanding technical confidence and vibrant audacity, elongating the principal figure, nervously breaking his folds, and placing Charity and her children outside the architectural parameters of the framing niche. In this work, Ghaffar terminated the front to a meticulous degree of finish, but as we've chosen to show it in the exhibition, its sides and its back reveals the artist's fiery hands at work, as Pascoli tells us, that portati dal vivo fuoco that animated his oeuvre. Well, the exhibition transcends chronology. So Melchiorre Ghaffar St. Thomas of Villanova compares so well with Joseph Calleja's Piro, transcending stylistic barriers and the centuries that divide these two works. Calleja's quick-working hand, rushing through wet clay, captures the striking brilliance of the artistic dialogue between the spiritual and the narrative. Piro is cast in bronze, and the permanence of the metal freezes the verve of the artist's hand in this solemn and deeply melancholic representation of the sad clown. A giant of modern art, Calleja's spiritual intensity is brilliantly captured in this fascinating drawing. Izzim el-Tannar hakem id-Dinya. The fiery horse conquered the world. His blue crayon almost tears forcefully through the paper in striking and breathtaking movements that dramatically capture Lucifer as an angel riding on his horse, hovering violently over a fiery red ground. The profound philosophical, spiritual, and intellectual grounding of Calleja's works destroy any hint at decorative narrative. The same ardent spirit is captured in Antoine Camilleri's apocalyptic horses. The horses of the apocalypse are executed through brushwork, bursting with phenomenal energy and furious movement, with the paint moving so fast that it drips throughout. Camilleri was a pivotal figure in Maltese modern contemporary art. His work conveyed the narrative with maximum energy in a technique which was so typical of his intensely emotive and expressive art. This is one of a series that Camilleri produced on this subject. Camilleri, who repetitively challenged his very own dynamics. Well, this is such a beautiful, romantically tinged tribute to the English poet Percy Shelley. Antonio Shortino's refined and polished Woman from Shelley is an exemplary model of the artist's versatility and of his extraordinary technical ability in modeling wet clay. Lying on the ground, the girl raises herself, tense only in her arms, as she lifts her head to capture the air. It is a work of grace and poignancy, executed with a refined delicacy in the rendering of the flesh, and with extraordinary dexterity in the modeling of the folds of her thin dress, particularly from the back. And here we chose to turn the statue around, so that the energetic movements of Shortino's tools in the wet clay become palpable testimony of the speed with which he finished this work. This plaster work is a modello for a marble work, which he executed later. Well, this same spirited execution is palpable in the other works. In Edward Caruana Dingley's Portrait of an Old Man, where bold and fast strokes of pigment-laden brush reveal Caruana Dingley's mastery, economical and strikingly efficient technique. Giuseppe Calli's Head of a Man shows the steady, fast, and accurate hand of a talented draftsman. Dated 1903, the bearded old man was the perfect model for one of the artist's many sayings. Captured in momentary snapshots, that characterized Kali's drawings. The movement of the pencil is charged and fraught, rushing through the paper and defining shape and volume as it changes in vigor, intensity, and speed. Kali and Caruana Dingley were leading portrait painters, who between them produced an incredible corpus of portraits from life settings, capturing the image of Malta's leaders, the upper class and the middle class of the late 19th and the first half of the 20th century. However, they also painted and drew, as we see here, random Maltese figures whose informal portraits were free from the confines of the official and formal typologies and the more polished techniques. So these fugitive movements and moments are captured with extraordinary brilliance by Vincent Apap's brother Willie, famous for the speed with which he worked, and this pen drawing, simple pen drawing of two female nudes. It is what happens in the background, that with the ease and comfort of a sure hand, Willie drew a girl taking off her top. Possibly the model herself was undressing and preparing for a long sitting. A fleeting moment captured through the artist's natural urge to sketch. And this is what we show in the drawings of Trevelyan. This is what we show in the drawings of Edward Lear, this natural urge to sketch. Drawings from nature and capturing informal poses had a long tradition. We see this in the works of Favre, but we also see it in the 19th century. The representation of the nude or the draped figure in fleeting or fast poses was a staple of academy drawing and an inherent part of training, as well as a lifelong exercise. Well, this drawing is datable to Giuseppe Cali's early maturity. It is a typical academy study in which the figure was given what is called a posa in movimento, a dynamic pose, bending forward as though pulling at a rope. The swinging movement of the figure is marvelously complemented by the diagonal imprint that Kali gave to the movement of his graphite, with fast adjustments on the amount of pressure exerted to create darker values and to blend and render illusion of form. On the contrary, Antoine Camilleri's two main nudes is clearly not done from a life sitting, but it is the result of decades of experience and of hundreds of drawings, the kind of training admired by theorists and critics. It is one of the most energetic of his nude studies, with his pen gliding through the paper, following an automatic impulse issued from the brain. The beauty of this drawing is that he repeated this very same pose a number of times, and he gave it, as you can see, an autobiographical feel. There's the reference to his numerous operations and the stitches from his own operations, almost in an obsessive and repetitive self-representation, moving from the first study of this pose, which survives and which he had executed at the École Supérieure des Beaux-Arts in Paris in 1949, whilst that dates to 1973. It's clear that he repeatedly returned to that sheet. Bozzetti were admired by theorists. Read what Vasari tells us about Bozzetti, where artists jot down their first thoughts and move from primi pensieri to compositional studies and to define the route towards the realization of the final work. Vasari tells us that it is at this moment that the artist's mind races fast, and the problem was that the hand tries to keep up with it. Moments of brilliance and of artistic furor reveal the frenzy of the work at hand, the passion and the rage of an artist trying to capture his own thoughts and creative spirit. so many stories are told about great drawings. This is a fascinating one by Mattia Preti, and it was one of hundreds of drawings which he executed. The St. John the Baptist is one of the many drawings that Preti produced for the ceiling of St. John's Church in Valletta. Various drawings survive, numerous drawings survive, and preliminary sketches which attest to the creative spirit of the artist and beautifully trace the development of some scenes from the primi pensieri to the actual realization of the monumental scheme in oil on stone. Many of these were probably executed in September of 1661, and I would love to have been there to imagine the mesmerized Grand Master, awestruck by these drawings, the product of a fast-working virtuoso, the like of whom Malta had never seen before. There are spirited sketches, drawings of hands, of individual figures, of parts, and even of a dog. Studies for narratives, for compositions, provide insight on the artist working on the story, whilst others show him exercising himself continuously on the difficulties of sotto in su foreshortening, especially in that of angels in flight. A soft line races vigorously on the blank sheet to define the essential figure of John and the angels, changing in tone and in width as Preti eased the pressure or exerted more strength on the paper. Lines superimpose as quick and rapid changes of mind and direction quickly established the final pose. The beauty of all this, as you can see in the show, is that this should have been executed within seconds. A pause to ponder would establish the final move, namely that of modeling the figure with rapid parallel strokes that mark the shadows, whilst further pressure deeply and rapidly defined the darks. The exhibits on display and the comparisons presented in our show that technical dexterity and fast work is a unifying factor that transcends differences in style, technique, narrative, and subject matter. And that, for example, we can place work by Baroque masters to engage in paragons with the modern and the contemporary. The exhibition therefore runs as a tribute to the inventive mind and to the fast hand, to the virtuosity of artists whose talent, panache, and technical capability made them masters of speed, rapidity, and self-assurance. Praised by theorists, admired by patrons, and feared by slow artists, the fast artist was not only seen as an ideal, but was essentially a symbol of innovation. More than anything else, our exhibition therefore displays, exalts, and celebrates both technical prestezza and inventive genius. Thank you. Thank you.